July 1944. The rain had started before dawn, soft and steady, carrying the smell of diesel and wet soil through the camp 3 miles south of St. Lo. Frank Novak stood beside his Sherman, boots sinking into mud, the world around him still gray and half asleep. "Lucky strike," the tank's name said in chipped white paint across the barrel, a joke from his loader about their odds. But Frank didn't feel lucky. He felt like a man standing at the edge of a math problem that refused to add up. The sheet of paper in his hand, the day's briefing, spelled out the equation plainly enough. A German Tiger could strike from more than a mile away. His own 75mm gun? 300 yards, maybe, if he was close enough to smell the paint on its armor. In the last 48 hours, one Tiger had destroyed 11 Allied tanks. 11 crews gone, just like that. 55 men erased because Doctrine said they should move in line with concentrated fire. Doctrine didn't bleed, men did. He folded the briefing once, then again, slipping it into the same pocket where Rose's last letter rested. He had tried to answer her that morning, to write something honest, but the truth was too heavy for ink. He'd crossed out the words 3 times before settling on the lie she needed. "We've got them outnumbered." It was technically true. Factories back home were building Shermans faster than the enemy could build anything. He'd built some of them himself in Detroit, before the uniform, before the gun oil smell replaced machine grease. He still remembered the clang of steel on the assembly floor, the hum of the conveyor line that never stopped. Back then, it had felt like progress. Now, standing in Normandy mud, it felt like arithmetic. 1 Tiger equals 5 Shermans, and every time that equation balanced, someone's story ended. Around him, his crew moved through their routine with quiet efficiency. Jaime Walsh, the youngest, cleaned the gun breech like it was Sunday service, humming a hymn too softly for words. Rodriguez checked the radio cables, muttering about static. Chen adjusted elevation gears by feel alone, his mind already 10 seconds ahead of every order. They were a rhythm now, not soldiers, but a machine that breathed, loaded, and fired together. Still, beneath the rhythm was something unspoken, a tension that sat in every pause. "Sarge, you think we'll see action today?" Jaime asked without looking up. Frank's answer came slow. "Intel says the Germans are pulling back. Might be quiet." But the lie hung in the air like smoke. When the summons came, it came without fanfare. Just a runner, soaked through, shouting for all tank commanders to assemble. Frank joined the others in the briefing tent. 12 men who'd learned to read fear in each other's faces faster than maps. Captain Morrison stood at the front, his uniform creased, eyes hollow from nights without sleep. He didn't waste time on encouragement. "Gentlemen, we have confirmation of a Tiger near Hill 192, call sign Iron Ghost, commanded by Oberleutnant Karl Brandt, 47 confirmed kills since Tunisia." The canvas roof trembled under the rain as Morrison unrolled 2 diagrams side by side, the Sherman, the Tiger. The comparison looked like a bad joke. "Our 75mm can penetrate 68mm of armor at 500 yards, Morrison said. "The Tiger's frontal plate is 100mm. Its 88mm cannon penetrates ours at 2,000. The numbers didn't lie. They never did. The silence that followed was thicker than the air itself. Frank had seen those charts before, years ago on the factory floor, explaining why they built 5 Shermans for every German tank. Quantity over quality. The phrase sounded clever in Detroit. Here, it was just cold comfort inside a steel coffin. Someone in the back asked if they could flank, maybe try smoke and surprise. Morrison's jaw tightened. "We follow doctrine. Suppress with smoke, advance in line, concentrate fire. You know the procedure." He dismissed them with a salute that felt like a benediction. Outside, the rain had turned to mist, clinging to everything it touched. Frank gathered his crew by the tank, looked at their faces, each one younger than his memory wanted to admit. "If we do this by the book," he said quietly, "we won't make it through the day." Jaime swallowed hard, glancing at the cross scratched into his helmet. Rodriguez didn't speak. Chen just nodded once, his expression already somewhere far away, seeing angles in hedgerows and trajectories in shadows. Frank took a long breath, eyes tracing the horizon beyond the camp. Somewhere out there, a German commander sat inside 60 tons of armor, waiting. Doctrine said the Tiger was unstoppable, but Doctrine didn't know Detroit. It didn't know how geometry could change a fight, or how a man who'd built tanks from the ground up could see weaknesses in their design. He touched the pocket where Rose's letter rested against his chest, felt the curve of her handwriting through the fabric, and made a quiet promise to the air. If the manual couldn't save them, he'd write his own. July 1944. The column slid into the green maze of Normandy like a metronome set to caution. Shermans kept their prescribed spacing, each vehicle a measured beat, 50 yards between holes, a rhythm drilled into them at training grounds and polished into muscle memory on the road to France. Men called cadence into the radios. Drivers watched for the slightest break in the hedgerows. Loaders checked rounds as if counting out prayers. Everything about the movement felt official, tidy. Speed limits, intervals, escalation procedures. The sort of checklist meant to turn chaos into something manageable. The manual promised predictability, and predictability promised survival. They advanced into lanes that swallowed sound. Hedges rose like walls of living wood, cutting sightlines to a handful of yards and turning every turn into a potential ambush. The landscape itself became a teammate and an adversary, turning wide-open Doctrine into something brittle. At first it seemed to hold. Engines hummed, suspension creaked, and the line flowed down the planned route, a string of steel and intent. Then the air shattered. The first 88-millimeter round arrived not as a distant thunder, but a violent punctuation. It struck the lead vehicle with effortless precision. Metal folded under that impact, as if someone had struck a bell with a hammer. The turret sheared, fuel and ammunition igniting in a single, terrible bloom. Where a functioning tank had been, there was suddenly only a shell and a column of black smoke cutting the morning sky. The prescribed response, suppress with smoke, advance together, concentrate fire, lived and died by sight lines. With those denied by hedgerows and the Tiger's position hidden in natural concealment, the playbook unraveled in seconds. Radios filled with panic-tinged calls for backup and withdrawal. Commanders barked coordinates that rung hollow against the pounding in everyone's ears. Novak felt the vehicle shudder beneath him, and the smell of heated metal and burning lube filled the turret. He looked at the men beside him, at the way Jaime's hands gripped the gunner's wheel until knuckles whitened, and realized more than a formation was at stake. Trust was being tested. He did not wait for a miracle. The wreckage in front of them was a lesson in plain sight. The Tiger's long-range reach turned the textbook into theater where only one side held the script. Novak reached for the map with the same urgency somebody reaching for a lifeline. Not out of superstition, but because angles and distances were tools he understood better than tactics penned by committee. Where Doctrine offered a sequence of steps, the topography offered choices. Lanes, hedgerow openings, a sunken farm lane that hugged the ground and might hide approaching tracks. He spread the paper across the tank's cramped desk, fingers tracing possible corridors of approach, clocking speeds and traverse times in his head, like a man reading a machine's pulse. Outside the cupola, distant shapes moved. The lead Sherman that had survived a single hit, trying to reel back, engine coughing, crew scrambling to escape the heat. Calls came in from other teams. Contact, unknown bearing, enemy holds high ground, reports that painted the same picture in different accents. Novak's pencil scratched lines rapidly, overlaying timing hacks with speed estimates. The Tiger's advantages were obvious: thick frontal armor, unmatched muzzle velocity, optics that could turn fog into a target. But every advantage had a price. The turret's weight meant slow rotations. The soil here clung heavy to tracks and slowed even the most powerful drive. Supply tails were thin. Each round the Tiger fired was precious. Those were variables Novak could manipulate. He thought of Detroit, assembly lines humming, parts bolted in patterns that made sense under controlled conditions. On the factory floor, he had learned to find bottlenecks and reroute flow, to use numbers to force outcomes. If a platen or a press could be outmaneuvered by moving the workpiece, maybe 60 tons of combat could be outmaneuvered the same way. He sketched a plan that treated the Tiger not as a mythical juggernaut, but as a geometry problem, intersecting vectors, synchronized arrival, and forced decision-making. If one tank presented itself as the main target, others could approach from directions the Tiger could not cover at once. It was not brute force, it was timing. The risk was obvious. The hedgerows could trap them, timing could misalign, and one mistake meant a single tank would still be lost. Still, staring at the blackened ruin that had been a companion of men only minutes before, Novak felt the manual's neat lines turn into a coffin. He folded the map and tucked it into a pocket, not to keep it secret, but because ideas travel better inside a man than pinned to canvas. If their doctrine was a safety net that clearly had holes, then improvisation would have to be the stitch. He looked at his crew, young, steady, expectant, and let a different kind of command form in his chest. They would not move as the book demanded. They would move as a single mind, responding to terrain and timing, and if luck would be required, they would make it a function of their own design. Night had thinned to a hush that smelled of oil and tired canvas. Novak sat alone under the flap of his tent, headlamp a narrow moon over paper, calculating in the language he trusted most, numbers. He marked turret traverse times in seconds, scribbled the Sherman sprint across different ground types, and wrote down the Tiger's likely fields of fire based on sun angles and hedgerow gaps. The idea took shape as geometry, a triangle of motion where timing, not armor, decided who could aim first. If one Sherman fed the Tiger a target head-on, the other two would arrive from flanks the Tiger could not cover in time. 3 vectors closing, 1 turret forced to choose. The Texas two-step, as Novak joked aloud to a tent that listened with no answer. Sleep had been a poor companion for nights. The plan was better. He imagined the hedgerow turns as nodes on a schematic, each gap an opportunity to force the enemy's gun to swing and reveal its side armor. The Tiger's turret, heavy and precise, traded speed for stability. Heavy machinery carries penalties. Novak's pencil chased those penalties into advantage. If they synchronized watches to the second, if smoke obscured optics at the right heartbeat, then arcs of approach could overlap in a tiny window where the Tiger's traverse lag became decisive. It was elegant and terrifying both, the sort of solution Detroit had taught him to value. Reroute the flow around the bottleneck and the line keeps moving. At 300, the Lighten Battalion HQ was still on. Morrison looked older than his age, paper creased with casualty reports and map lines. Novak spread his sketches out, voice low and urgent, laying out timing hacks, radio call signs, and fallback legs. He spoke like a foreman explaining a retooled assembly line. No flourish, only mechanics and contingencies. We pin it frontally with smoke, he said. 1 holds their fire long enough to draw the gun. 2 run flank lines at full throttle. Turret traverse takes time. Soil slows the tracks. We use both. Morrison's face registered every diagram the way a referee studies a play. For him, the cost was not only in men, but in orders and the paper trail that followed. Breaking formation could mean fragmented units, friendly fire in narrow lanes, an officer's career on the line. He tapped the map with a thumb that did not tremble. You get 1 chance, he said finally, each word a measured weight. 3 tanks. Execute at first light. If it fails, those crews are on your name. Responsibility hung between them like an iron bar. Novak steadied against it, as he had steadied wrenches on Detroit floors. He accepted the risk by answering with a single nod. Back in the dim of his tent, Novak called his crew together and walked them through the choreography, as if guiding a quartet through a score, watches synchronized to radio ticks, approach speeds carved into every driver's muscle memory, contingency codes sewn into voice calls. Jaime traced the movement on the margin of his Bible, fingers following lines with a reverence that felt like prayer without words. Rodriguez tucked a folded note into his pocket, not a last testament, but a quiet promise to his family to try every angle before surrendering to fate. They practiced radio brevity, the clicks and slashes of language that would keep seconds from unraveling. Outside, in the dark, the hedgerows breathed and held their secrets. Novak folded his sketches and slid them into the turret desk. Doctrine had offered a script. The land had offered options. He had chosen the latter. In the morning, they would test a simple truth. That motion and coordination could rewrite advantage. The plan was fragile. The men were not. The tent smelled of coffee gone cold and the ink of bad news. Captain Morrison sat hunched over a field desk, eyes rimmed red from hours of casualty reports, the lamplight cutting deep lines across his face. He didn't look up when Novak stepped in, boots slick with mud, sketches folded under his arm like contraband. For a long moment, the only sound was the tick of the kerosene lamp and the whisper of rain on canvas. "Sir," Novak began, voice steady but urgent, "I think I've found a way to beat that tiger." Morrison sighed through his nose, the sound of a man too tired for hope. "At 3 a.m, Sergeant. The only thing I want to beat is this paperwork." Novak laid the diagrams flat on the desk. 3 intersecting arrows, a triangle of motion scrawled in graphite and sweat. "It's about angles," he said. "We don't attack in line. We split. 1 Sherman pins with smoke, 2 flank from separate routes. Time to hit within 60 seconds. The tiger can't face all 3. Morrison looked up now, jaw tightening. "You're talking about breaking formation. Doctrine exists for a reason. We lose coordination in the bocage, we lose men." His tone was measured, but there was fatigue behind it, the kind that came from counting how many names turned into reports by sundown. Novak didn't back off. "Sir, we already lose men following doctrine. You've seen what happens. We advance straight into an 88. If we keep feeding it targets one by one, we'll run out of tanks before he runs out of shells." He pointed at a note beside the sketches. "That turret takes 30 seconds for a full rotation with power, twice that manually. If we hit from 3 directions, it's trapped in its own strength." The captain leaned back, studying Novak like a man judging whether courage had tipped into madness. Outside, thunder rolled somewhere over the low hills. The camp generator flickered. Morrison rubbed a hand over his eyes, muttering something under his breath. "And if your timing's off by half a minute, then we die the same way we've been dying all week," Novak answered. "But at least this time, we'll die trying something that isn't in the manual." The blunt honesty hung between them. Morrison stared down at the paper again, the geometry, the smoke signals, the synchronized radio ticks. There was precision in it, not bravado. Every risk accounted for, like parts on a production line. He'd been a soldier long enough to know when someone was guessing and when someone had done the math. He tapped the page once, hard enough to leave a fingerprint. "You get 1 shot," he said finally. 3 tanks, rawhide 2, 4, and 5. You run it at 0600. If it works, it's your idea. If it doesn't, it's your responsibility." Novak nodded. No salute, no relief, just a quiet acknowledgement between 2 men who understood that authority couldn't guarantee survival. Morrison exhaled, slow and deliberate. "One more thing," he added. "Out there, the hedgerows twist like a labyrinth. 1 wrong turn and you're firing at your own people. Make sure your men know every inch of ground before dawn." "I will, sir." Novak gathered his notes, tucking them back into their folder. The captain's last words followed him out the flap. "And Sergeant, if this fails, the Tiger writes the after-action report." Outside, the rain had stopped. A faint mist curled around the Shermans lined up in the dark, their hulls glistening under a weak moon. Novak paused beside Lucky Strike, resting a hand on its cold armor. 1 chance, 3 tanks, 60 seconds of perfection in a maze built to swallow mistakes. He glanced toward the east, where the first hint of light pressed against the clouds. Somewhere beyond those hedges, the tiger waited. 1 misstep, and the morning would belong to it. The morning broke with the color of steel, pale light spilling through mist, engines idling in a low mechanical growl. Novak climbed onto Lucky Strike and looked across the dew-slick field toward the hedgerows that hid Hill 192. His watch read, 0558. Everything that mattered would happen in the next 3 minutes. The crews were already strapped in, hatches sealed, voices clipped and precise over the radio. Rawhide 2, ready. Rawhide 4, ready. Rawhide 5, moving to smoke position. The geometry that had lived on a notepad was now rolling on treads, alive and loud. At exactly 0600, Rodriguez's voice cut through the static. Rawhide 5, frontal advance, smoke deployed. The first 75mm shell burst ahead in a white bloom, phosphorus cascading across the hedgerow, like fog catching fire. The tiger's perfect optics, its greatest edge, vanished in seconds under that thick, choking screen. Novak's gut tightened. That smoke was their only curtain. Once it cleared, everything would depend on angles, seconds, and nerve. "Driver, move," he ordered. Lucky Strike surged forward, the engine roaring as mud sprayed from the treads. Beside them, Chen's Sherman ghosted through a parallel lane, both tanks accelerating faster than Doctrine ever allowed. The plan depended on it. Momentum, not armor, was their shield now. Through the narrow periscope, Novak saw nothing but gray mist and the rhythmic flash of muzzle fire somewhere behind it. The Tiger was already firing blind. Its commander, Brandt, was reacting to noise and instinct, not sight. A blast ripped through the fog, the sound a whip crack of compressed air. Dirt and leaves rained down on Lucky Strike's hull as the round passed close enough to shake the tank like a struck drum. "Missed by 20 feet, Jaime reported, voice tight but steady. "Keep moving," Novak barked. 600 yards, target left. They broke through the edge of the hedgerow, and there it was. The Tiger, crouched low in a hollow, turret already turning toward the motion it could barely see. Even half obscured, it radiated menace. Thick slabs of sloped armor, that long-barreled 88, the black cross painted with the confidence of invincibility. "Target, side armor, 600, Novak shouted. Jaime squeezed the trigger, and the Sherman's 75mm gun thundered, the recoil slamming through their chests. Through his optics, Novak saw the round strike true, mid-hole near the ammunition rack. Sparks leapt, smoke flared, but when it cleared, the Tiger still moved. The shell had glanced, biting, but not breaking. "Reload!" he snapped, but the Tiger's turret was already rotating, that massive gun now tracking toward them. The seconds stretched, 15, 10, until another crack split the air, this one not from the Tiger, but from somewhere to their right. Chen's Sherman had arrived on the opposite flank, right on schedule. Novak caught the impact through his scope, a clean hit at the turret ring, the weakest link in all that German engineering. The explosion wasn't huge, just a hard metallic shriek as fragments ricocheted inside, but it was enough. The 88 stopped mid-rotation, jammed in place. Inside the Tiger, Karl Brandt must have known instantly what had happened. From Novak's angle, he could see the machine hesitate, tracks grinding as the driver tried to reposition, but it was too late. Rodriguez's Sherman burst from the smoke head-on, closing the triangle. 3 guns, 3 directions. Novak's crew worked like a single organism. Load, fire, adjust. Each round finding steel. The side armor cracked. One shot punched through the engine deck. Another sent black smoke pouring upward in a spiraling column. In 15 seconds, the Tiger's illusion of invincibility was gone. Flames licked the hatch, and then it happened. The turret hatch swung open, followed by human shapes clambering out, hands high, faces streaked with soot and disbelief. Novak watched them through the gun sight, breath slowing for the first time since dawn. "Cease fire," he ordered. His own heart was louder than the engine now. The crew's victory was wordless. A quick nod from Chen over the radio, a soft, "got him," from Jaime, who hadn't realized he'd said it aloud. Smoke curled upward like a white flag written by fate. The Tiger was finished. Not by better armor, not by luck, but by math and timing. For a moment, the battlefield went eerily still. Even the engines seemed to idle softer, as though the earth itself was taking stock of what had just shifted. The myth was over. Then the radio broke the silence. Static hissed, followed by a voice Novak recognized. Captain Morrison, tight with urgency. "All rawhide units, be advised. New contact reported. Another Tiger, Grid Quebec 7-4. Rawhide 6 and 7 destroyed. Multiple casualties. Rawhide 2, your closest. Acknowledge." The words hit like a physical blow. Jaime closed his eyes, whispering a single breath of disbelief. Rodriguez came over the radio, voice flat but steady. 2 miles east, same model. Morrison didn't answer. He didn't need to. The smoke from their victory hadn't even cleared, and already a new hunt was calling. Novak looked at the burning Tiger, the German crew standing beside it, hands raised, their expressions blank with the recognition of defeat. He exhaled slowly and reached for the radio. "Rawhide 2 copies," he said. "We're moving." The celebration died before it began. One Tiger had fallen, but the war's geometry wasn't finished. Somewhere beyond the next hedge, another was waiting to write its own equation. The Tiger still burned, the heat of it pulsing against Novak's face as he climbed down from Lucky Strike. The acrid stench of diesel and scorched paint filled the hedgerow lane, thick enough to taste. A few yards away, 5 men stood in a rough line, blackened uniforms, faces streaked with ash, their hands raised above their heads. One of them, taller than the rest, carried himself with a composure that didn't fit the moment. His uniform was soot-stained, but still carried the insignia of rank. Oberleutnant, the commander, the man who had nearly turned their column into wreckage. Novak approached slowly, sidearm drawn, but pointed low. "Who's in command here?" The officer stepped forward, chin lifted, eyes sharp even through the haze. "I am," he said, his English deliberate but clear. "Oberleutnant Karl Brandt." There was no arrogance in the voice, only weariness, the kind that came from years of fighting an equation that always demanded the same outcome. Novak motioned to Rodriguez. "Search them. Weapons first, then radios." As his crew secured the prisoners, Novak watched Brandt closely. There was something measured in the German's gaze, as if even now he was studying the geometry of defeat. When the last weapon was taken and the cuffs came out, Brandt didn't resist. Novak stepped closer, pulling a zip tie from his kit. "Hands," he said. The officer extended them without a word, the tie cinched tight with a plastic snap. Brandt's eyes flicked toward the burning hulk of his Tiger. The turret was still smoldering, the black cross on its side barely visible through soot. "You fought well," Novak said quietly, not as praise but as acknowledgement. "You built a hell of a machine." Brandt met his eyes. "No," he replied, voice low. "I built a mistake." That caught Novak off guard. He hesitated, hand still on the tie. "What do you mean?" The German looked past him, to where the smoke was thinning. A machine that could not lose on paper, but in the real world, it trades everything for strength, speed, flexibility, fuel. You surround it, and it dies standing still. The radio crackled again, Morrison's voice cutting through the moment. "Rawhide 2, report status." Novak keyed the mic. "Tiger neutralized, crew captured, we're assessing." Morrison's tone hardened. "Don't assess, move. Another Tiger at Quebec 74. We've lost 6 and 7. You're closest. You have to intercept." The line hissed, then went dead. Novak exhaled through his teeth, glancing toward the east. 2 miles, maybe less. Fuel was low, adrenaline lower. He looked back at Brandt. "How many Tigers are still out there?" The German's eyes didn't flinch. 2 more, perhaps 3. But you cannot face them the same way. Not without understanding how they think. "Then tell me," Novak said. Brandt tilted his head, studying him as though measuring whether this American sergeant was worth an answer. "You would ask your enemy to help you destroy his own?" Novak holstered his sidearm. "I'm asking an engineer to stop wasting good men on bad doctrine." For a moment, the only sound was the ticking of metal cooling on the Tiger's carcass. Then Brandt nodded once, almost imperceptibly. "I will help," he said finally. "Not to betray Germany, but because watching brave men die for errors of design, American or German, is not engineering. It's murder." Novak signaled Rodriguez. "Secure the others. Get them to the MPs." "We're taking him with us?" Jamie's voice wavered. "Sarge, we can't just—" "We can," Novak cut in. "And we will. The next Tiger's already killing our guys. If he knows how to stop it, we use that knowledge." Minutes later, Brandt was seated inside Lucky Strike's commander hatch, wrists bound but posture steady, eyes scanning the instruments like he'd known them for years. Jaime sat opposite him, sidearm resting on his knee, watching every move. Novak climbed in, slammed the hatch shut, and keyed the radio. "Rawhide 2, moving east. Coordinates Quebec, 74. The engine growled back to life, vibrating through the hull. Outside, smoke still curled from the burning Tiger as the tank rolled forward, treads crushing the wet earth. Brandt leaned toward the map spread across the console, his tone calm, professional, detached. "They will position on high ground," he said. "Hull down, with intersecting fields of fire, side armor, 80 millimeters. You can penetrate at 800 yards if your angle is clean, but your greatest ally is time. Force them to pivot. Every second their turret moves is a second they cannot fire." Novak studied him for a beat, then gave a short nod. "Then we make them pivot." The German's mouth tightened in what might have been approval. The two men, builder and destroyer, sat in silence as the tank gained speed, cutting through the mist toward another fight neither entirely wanted but both understood. Outside, dawn was burning the fog to gold. The fuel gauge trembled just above half. Time was thinning, like everything else. But in that narrow space between exhaustion and resolve, Novak felt something unexpected: clarity. The first tiger had fallen to geometry. The next would fall to understanding. And the man who once made it unstoppable was now the one showing them where to aim. Carl slid closer to Novak's map with the ease of a man who had slept with schematics in his head. He spoke not like a captive pleading for mercy, but like a lecturer at a bench, where the ground dipped, where a hedge gap offered a lane, which approach would force a turn, and which would funnel a target into exposed metal. He named distances in meters and seconds, not rhetoric. 1200, smoke 200, flank at 30 miles per hour, hold fire until the barrel swings. Novak repeated the cadence into his headset, breaking the plan down into the clipped commands that would keep seconds from unraveling. Radio, tickets for zeros, 30, visual check on the first hedge gap. Do not commit alone. The prisoners and the burning hulks around them made the lesson painfully immediate. This was not theory anymore. They moved like a single organism. Engines growled in a measured chorus, treads bit into soft Norman soil, and the three Shermans slid along their designated vectors. Smoke blossomed where it should, swallowing optics and making the tiger guess. Carl's voice, calm and exact, threaded through static with corrections and micro-timing. Pivot left 30, hold 2 seconds now. Novak felt the plan settle into the crew. Driver's hands steady, loader's cadence sure, gunner's breath a metronome. When the flanker met the hull at the designed angle, metal screamed. The hit wasn't theatrical, but it was decisive. Mechanical failures and ruptured systems bled the tiger's will before the crew understood their machine had been outmaneuvered. Men tumbled from hatches, some moving slowly as if waking, others scrambling, disbelief painting their faces. There was no triumph in Novak's voice, only necessity. He ordered restraint, prisoners secured, and then listened as reports came in over 3 channels. The grid was clearing, friendly units were consolidating, and a different silhouette rolled into view beyond the smoke, longer, lower, and carrying a barrel that mattered in a way brute numbers had not yet allowed. A British Firefly eased into the clearing with a confidence born of a gun that could reach back past the tiger's advantage. Lieutenant Powell climbed down from its turret, wiped his hands, and grinned in the sort of half-amused, half-relieved way soldiers wear when the rules of a game change. "Nice dancing," he said, clapping Novak on the shoulder, "but this here makes the dance optional." The Firefly's 17-pounder was not just another weapon, it was a different kind of math. Where improvisation had exploited mechanical delay and soil, the British piece promised to rewrite engagement ranges outright, to give frontal defeat where before only flanking could do the trick. Novak stared at the long barrel and understood the shift. Tactics born of necessity could be taught, and tools born of design could make those tactics redundant. Engineers from 2 armies exchanged a look that acknowledged both the brutality of the morning and the strange practical fellowship in solving a problem. As MPs arrived to collect captives and salvage began, Novak felt the shape of the future forming, not just another fight, but a new equation where smarter guns and smarter moves would meet on more equal terms. Powell's words hung in the morning air, half pride, half prophecy. The Firefly sat behind him like a promise made of steel, its 17-pounder barrel gleaming in the new light. It was long enough to reach across the battlefield and end the conversation before it began. Novak circled it once, boots sinking in the churned mud, taking in the reinforced mantlet, the widened breach, the quiet certainty in its design. "Front arc kills at 1,000 yards, Powell said, almost offhand, like someone mentioning good weather. "1 shot, clean through. They'll never know what hit them." For a moment, Novak didn't answer. He just looked from the Firefly's gun back to Lucky Strike, still streaked with soot and bloodied paint from the morning's geometry lesson. "So the trick becomes obsolete," he said finally. "The triangle, the timing, it all gets replaced by a bigger number." Powell shrugged. "That's progress, Your dance bought time for this. He tapped the gun barrel affectionately. Now you can go head to head. It should have felt like victory. Instead, Novak found his eyes drifting to Karl Brandt, standing under guard near the wreckage of his Tiger. His wrists were still bound, but he carried himself like a man observing an experiment reach its conclusion. The German's gaze lingered on the Firefly, then on the Shermans that had outmaneuvered him. So, he said softly, his accent tracing each word like careful blueprints, good ideas become doctrine. That is how wars evolve. Novak walked over. The MPs were already waiting to escort Karl to a holding truck. The two men faced each other, close enough to smell smoke and oil still hanging on their uniforms. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Karl nodded slightly, the faintest gesture of respect. "You said Detroit?" he asked. Novak nodded. "And you?" "Henschel Kassel. We both built machines for the same equation." He glanced once more at the Firefly. "Perhaps next time, something that builds instead of breaks." Novak extended his hand, and after a pause, Karl took it. The handshake was firm, formal, not soldiers, but engineers acknowledging the logic that bound them both. Around them, engines rumbled, smoke drifted, and the battlefield began to shrink back into routine. MPs led Karl toward the trucks. Powell called out orders for ammunition collection. Crews refueled in silence. Novak climbed back onto Lucky Strike and looked once more at the clearing where their fight had ended. The Tiger lay twisted in black. The Firefly gleamed beside it, and between them stretched the invisible line where improvisation had crossed into policy. He knew before anyone wrote it down that what had started as a desperate hack in a hedgerow would soon have a name, a diagram, and a place in the manual. The war would remember it not as luck or defiance, but as standard operating procedure, proof that thought could travel faster than fear. By September, the fields around St. Lo had turned quiet. The hedgerows were still scarred, but the thunder that once lived there had drifted east with the front. In the armored unit's bulletin, a new line appeared in the doctrine updates, buried among routine amendments and field notes. Coordinated multi-angle maneuver, codename Texas Two-Step. No fanfare, no mention of who had first drawn it on a notebook under a flickering lantern. Only the acknowledgement that geometry had entered strategy. In training grounds from England to the Ardennes, instructors now spoke of timing hacks and turret lag, as if they had always been part of the rulebook. What had begun as desperation was now discipline, and the numbers finally leaned in their favor. The Fireflies arrived next, dozens, then hundreds, their long 17-pounder barrels cutting a new silhouette against the French countryside. Crews that once feared the Tiger's long reach now talked of even ground, of equal duels. The myth was dissolving. Reports from the front described Tigers destroyed at range, their crews abandoning machines that had once been symbols of inevitability. The legend that one Tiger equaled 10 Shermans was fading into arithmetic that no longer worked. Novak saw the change not in statistics, but in silence. The briefings were shorter, the casualty lists lighter. The mechanics back at depot stations joked again, the laughter of men who finally believed the fight wasn't rigged against them. Lucky Strike had been patched, repainted, and reassigned twice, but he still rode with her, still tracing those same angles on his map out of habit. He had stopped expecting to see the enemy as monsters. Now they were machines, and machines could be understood. One gray afternoon, the mail truck arrived. Among the standard issue forms and requisitions lay a letter marked with the Red Cross seal. The envelope was thin, stamped POW Camp, England. Inside, a single typed line, Oberleutnant Karl Brandt, alive. Assisting Allied Technical Interrogation Division, Specialization, Tiger and Panther Systems Analysis. Beneath it, a short note in careful English handwriting, Tell Sergeant Novak. Good geometry never dies. Novak read it twice, the corners of his mouth twitching into something halfway between a smile and a sigh. He folded the paper and slipped it into the pocket where Rose's letters always lived. Outside, engines rumbled again, routine patrols, not panic. The war was moving on, and somehow, so was he. That night, under the same dim light that had once witnessed his sketches, Novak finally picked up his pen and began the letter he'd failed to write weeks before. The words came easier now, shaped by the calm that follows understanding. "Rose," he wrote, "today I learned something the numbers never showed. Wars aren't won by the biggest guns or the thickest armor. They're won by thinking, by refusing to keep doing what doesn't work just because someone said it should. And sometimes, the man who was supposed to stop you ends up teaching you how to survive." He paused, looking at Jaime's old sketch pinned to the tent wall. 3 Shermans closing around 1 tiger, the impossible triangle that had made sense of chaos. He smiled faintly, signing his name with a steady hand. For the first time since landing in France, the math felt finished. The paper trembled faintly under Novak's hand, not from nerves, but from the low hum of Lucky Strike's idling engine outside. The camp around him had settled into the strange rhythm soldiers knew too well, somewhere between exhaustion and habit. He wrote by flashlight, the same narrow cone of light that had once illuminated battle maps and geometry sketches. Only this time, the numbers had turned into words. "Rose," he began again, slower, more deliberate. "When I first came here, I thought the war was a contest of machines. Bigger guns, thicker plates, longer range. I believed the best design would win, that if we built fast enough, strong enough, the rest would take care of itself. But I've seen what numbers miss. The machines matter, yes, but they don't think. We do. We make the decisions the blueprints can't. Sometimes the fight isn't about what's built. It's about who's willing to rethink what's possible." He paused, letting the pen rest against the paper. Outside, a mechanic called for a wrench. A laugh answered him, and somewhere a truck backfired like a distant echo of battle. The war wasn't over, not yet, but it was changing, and so was he. He looked up at the tent wall, where Jaime's old drawing was still pinned by a bent nail, a quick sketch on the back of a Bible page, 3 small Shermans encircling a single tiger. The pencil lines were rough, uneven, but they carried more truth than any technical manual ever had. That drawing was a memory, a theorem, and a prayer all in one. 3 angles, 1 heart, the geometry of survival. Novak traced the air over it with his finger. He thought of Karl Brandt, somewhere in an English camp, teaching Allied officers how to dismantle the myth he'd once embodied. He thought of Morrison, still fighting doctrine 1 report at a time, and of Rodriguez and Chen, their voices steady over the radio when seconds had meant life. Even the machines seemed quieter now, humbled by what their operators had taught them. "Wars aren't won by metal," he wrote next. "They're won by minds, by men who refuse to accept that the way it's always been done is the only way it can be. Sometimes the enemy you face ends up handing you the key, and sometimes that key opens more than a tank's armor. It opens the truth that courage isn't blind obedience, it's intelligent defiance." He signed his name and folded the letter carefully, sealing it beside the others he would send when supply trucks came. The night outside was cold, but calm, the first in weeks without artillery on the horizon. The smoke that once meant danger now rose from cook fires and oil drums, simple signs of life returning to order. Novak stepped out into the dark, the sound of idling engines fading behind him. The air smelled of rain and fuel and something faintly sweet. Freedom, maybe, or relief. He glanced east, where the dawn would rise soon enough, and smiled to himself. The factory worker from Detroit had become an engineer of survival. The battlefield had been his blueprint, the men his moving parts, the outcome his proof. The math had changed, but the principle stayed simple. When courage and ingenuity work together, no machine, no myth can outlast them.